It's going to look at three specific sources that discuss this particular issue. So we have a section of Tacitus, a very short section of the Res Gestae, and also a section of Cassius Dio. I will point out, however, that these are not the only sources that can be used for this particular key point about whether or not Augustus restored the Republic, but these ones are separated out, particularly the Tacitus, because of the discussion he has about Augustus's rule and also the sort of reigns of key individuals. Start with the Tacitus source, and you can see already that I've highlighted some stuff in different colours, and that's because he's talking about different aspects of Augustus's rule and some key individuals. So keep in mind, Tacitus does not like Augustus. He does not like emperorship. He thinks it's a really disgusting thing. And that's because he'd lived under a really unpleasant time under the emperors later, after the ones we're looking at. So initially, this source talks basically about like a brief history of Rome, and it's like condensed down to a few key lines. So the fact that they had been under kings, and then Lucius Brutus, who's related to the Brutuses that killed Caesar, then brought under the democracy. There's no dictatorships unless they have to have it. Then there's a despot, and then they have Pompey, Crassus to Caesar, then Lepidus to Antony to Augustus. And literally Roman history in a nutshell. And then we have some really nice quotes about how he sees the level of power that Augustus had. So, who under the name of the Princeps, remember that means first citizen, took the whole state, exhausted by civil discords, into his rule. So exhausted by civil discords, if we think about the fall of the Republic in our period, and we'd looked at three specific civil wars, this is also pointing out that Rome had had a really difficult sort of at least 50 years, if not longer, and it's because, according to Tacitus, they were fed up of war, or these civil wars, that they were willing to accept Augustus's rule. But importantly, he takes the whole state into his own hands. So obviously that's showing that he's not acting like a republican. He also points out that the writers at the time were willing to write about Augustus, and some of them were a little bit concerned about the rule of Augustus, except that they were then kind of deterred by the growth of flattery. So the criticisms in writing start to be discouraged, because everyone else is really happy with Augustus, but also Augustus was using promotions and money, etc., in order to make other people happy. We then have a nice little throwaway line about the next emperors, so Tiberius, Gaius, also known as Caligula, Claudius and Nero. So these reigns were recounted either during their lifetime terms, which fear made false, or after death when loathing was still fresh. So not relevant to Augustus, but this is quite a nice quote as like an overview of the issues of the emperors that come after. Now, Tacitus in this bit basically claims that he has no bias at all, which is a load of rubbish, but hey, he makes the claim. Okay. So again, another potted history about what he's basically repeating himself about the whole kind of how Augustus came to power. And then it says that Augustus is content to defend the people by the virtue of the tribunican power. So he's admitting that he had stepped down from being in the triumvirate and then as consul, and instead just rules through being tribune. And then it's a fantastic quote about the use of largesse to keep people happy, and I would expect to see a lot of this used in essays. Once he had seduced the soldiery of gifts, the people with corn, and everyone with the delights of peace. So this is how, basically, according to Tacitus, that Augustus has managed to secure his position with the Roman people. He gradually increased his power, aggregating to himself the functions of the Senate, the magistrates, and the law. So clearly that bit there is not republican. And I've deliberately not highlighted it in two different colours so you can make notes on this. He faced no opposition. It's not true, but that's according to Tacitus, since the bravest souls had died in battle, i.e. Actium, or had fallen victim to proscriptions, obviously talking about during the triumvirate. Surviving nobles enjoyed a wealth and status which increased in proportion to their civility. So the more they, according to Tacitus, acted like slaves to Augustus, the better their status would be. So that's why the Senate, basically, according to Tacitus, were happy to accept his rule. And they preferred present safety to the insecurity of the past, which is understandable. The provinces too had little objection to the prevailing state of affairs, as previously they had lost faith in the rule of the Senate of the people because they'd been treated really badly. But I'll highlight that. I don't know why I didn't highlight that. So remember, said during the late Republic, the only way that people could make money back from the loans that they had to run up the curses on them was basically to kind of strip the provinces bare. And when Augustus comes in, one of the first things he does is to stop that practice, and he institutes pay for the provincial governors, he institutes pay for the soldiers, all that sort of stuff. So the provinces are left in a far more kind of sustainable situation, which obviously is not technically Republican, but is good. Like, if you're provincial, you're going to be pretty blooming happy with the changes that Augustus has made as a result of it, because you're no longer having your land stolen off you, so that's always nice. Augustus, however, took various reinforcements for his despotism, so that's again a nice quote to show that he has not restored the Republic. And then it talks about him basically promoting members of his family, so he's thinking about succession. So he raised Claudius Marcellus, so that is his nephew, to the pontificate, so that's a priesthood, and the curule aedileship while he was still a youth, so he's promoting a family member too young. He promoted Marcus Agrippa, because obviously to help him in the victory at Actium, to a double consulship, and then on the death of Marcellus made him his son-in-law. So yeah, he gets Agrippa married off to his daughter, as in Augustus's daughter, not his own daughter. It'd be a bit weird. He granted imperatorial titles to Tiberius Nero and Claudius Drusus, his stepsons. In other words, he makes them commanders of the army. Later on, he adopted Agrippa's sons, Gaius and Lucius, again before they were while they were too young, and he had been shamelessly eager, despite a parade of refusal, for them to be named Principes Iuventus, which basically means princes of the youth, and to be designated consuls. So he was always promoting family members, but he was doing it in a way that was quite weirdly quite Republican. So remember we talked about obviously dignitas being really important, and Romans believed you had to earn dignitas, and you had to you couldn't just be given a title or a power, you had to kind of work your way up through the system. So what Augustus was doing with his family members was basically promoting them and giving them certain jobs in order for them to gain their own dignitas. So obviously through his grandsons, Gaius and Lucius, that's kind of making them princes of youth and also making them consuls. Through his stepsons, that's their use in the army. I'll explain why these bits are in blue in a second. You then have a bit of a potted history, to be honest, through his reign. So Lucius Caesar and then Gaius, so his two grandsons, they basically died very young, and Tacitus believes either it was by fate, yes, probably, or by the treachery of their stepmother Livia, unlikely. So the bits in blue are about Livia, Augustus's wife, and I would highlight those in different colours because one of the themes we look at is the role of friends, family, sorry, I got pain on my side, and wives. So it's useful to have the quotes about Livia highlighted in a different colour, because there isn't going to be a wife section for Augustus, so she kind of pops up every now and again. Nero, that is Tiberius, was Augustus' only surviving stepson, and everything now converged onto him. So the fact he's kind of promoting this family, the fact he's giving him titles, that he's now setting Tiberius up to be his heir, shows that he's not acting particularly Republican, because he shouldn't be inheriting any titles. He was adopted as Augustus' son, his colleague in Imperium, and partner in the Tribunicum power. So this is very much the promotion of Tiberius, and was paraded before all the armies. And then we have some more little sort of digs at Livia, his mother no longer scheming behind the scenes, but giving open encouragement. Now that Augustus was an old man, she'd come to exercise such domination over him that he banished to the island of Planasia his only grandson, Agrippa Posthumus. Now, he does do that, but not for the reasons that Tacitus is suggesting here. I should point out that Roman writers really dislike women, partly because of, totally actually, because of misogyny. So the idea that Livia would have any vague influence over her husband and make him think of other options in his behaviour would be seen by the Roman authors as really outrageous. So that's why Livia is getting such poor treatment in these sources, because Augustus did actually listen to his wife sometimes about policy, and therefore she was evil and was behind the scenes always trying to do things. Okay, fine. There's some other stuff about him kind of forcing some adoptions, but not particularly interesting. We have a little bit about his military problems. So against the Germans, his purpose was rather to obliterate the disgrace of Varus's loss of an army. So this is, we'll do it when we do military stuff, but essentially the commander Varus Varius, lost a load of legions to some Germans in a forest. It's a really famous thing that happened under Augustus's reign. And basically what Tacitus is saying, that this was the only really time that Augustus tries to do any military commands. Again, not entirely true. There are other things that he does. So that is sort of maybe a slight change from Republican, where they're always constantly trying to increase the empire. But when we do his military stuff, we'll talk about that in more detail. Then we have a nice quote about that could be used to show that the Republic has been restored. So at home all was quiet, yay, no more civil war, and the magistrates enjoyed their traditional titles. So, things were continuing as they should be, as you would expect it to. But then he also makes this point that everybody who was alive after Actium, and the elders had died during the civil wars, they didn't really understand the Republic, how many had remained who had seen it. So they think it's like a republic. But is it? Because they have nothing to compare it to, because they weren't alive at the time. The revolution was complete. Nothing remained of the old sound ways. Another fantastic, he did not restore the Republic quote. There's going to be quite a few in a row now. Equality had been abandoned. Brilliant. All only looked to the commands of the princeps, so that's Augustus, fearing nothing for the present, while Augustus remained in good health. Because basically all the power is in Augustus's hands. So obviously if he dies, there will be a power vacuum, and then there'll be lots of problems. Okay. He then have some random sections about his family again. We have an Agrippa. It's not the Agrippa. This is his grandson, Agrippa Postumus. In fact, I'll type that full name in for you. Postumus. Which I spelled wrong. Postumus. No, I spelled it right. Okay, cool. Anyway, he was banished because he was very unpleasant. We then have Tiberius Nero, who becomes the emperor. Had maturity and well tried in war because he was a great military commander. But he had the old ingrained arrogance of the Claudian family and a sadistic streak. So this is quite handy for when we talk about Tiberius when in his reign. He'd been brought up in the ruling family as a young man. He'd been loaded with the consulships and triumphs. Again, he'd been promoted, not very Republican, who promoting family members. He had no thoughts in his mind save resentment, hypocrisy, and secret lusts. You might get the impression that Tacitus does not like Tiberius. No one likes Tiberius. Then we have more stuff about Livia. There was his mother endowed with all of a woman's lack of restraint. Thanks for that. They were doomed to be slaves to a woman and a couple of adolescents. I don't need to explain these. It's just particularly unpleasant. So then he's running through Augustus's life really quickly. So Augustus is in his 60s by the time this bit's happening. His health is deteriorating. Some suspected his wife of plotting his death. No, they didn't. She didn't do it. He just died because he was old and ill. So just the fact. And then Tiberius is basically recalled by Livia, and Livia established a tight cordon of guards around the house and approach roads, basically to control the news that came out. Then Augustus is dead. Lots of stuff happens in between, obviously, that we will have a look at. So there you go. Lots of quotes there that you could say sort of show there's been a restoration of the Republic. And there's also quotes to show that he had not restored the Republic at all. Sorry, shifting in my chair a little bit. So then we have just two short sources. We have Res Gestae, who clearly is not going to say that he had not restored the Republic because it's Augustus. So although the Senate and Roman people consented that I alone be made the curator of laws and customs, i.e. act like a censor, with the highest power, he says, I received no magistracy offered contrary to the customs of the ancestors, i.e. I did nothing beyond what was happening in the Republic. Okay? I did through tribunican power, and 5 times on my own accord, I both requested and received from the Senate a colleague in such power. So again, he has colleagues, so therefore he's not acting unrepublican, because he always has colleagues, and he's never more important than anybody else. There you go. So then we have this short extract from a speech that Agrippa gave, as in Agrippa from the Battle of Actium Agrippa. And essentially what the speech is trying to do is to show that Augustus was aware that one person having too much power was a dangerous thing, and that's why he didn't have too much power, because it was a dangerous thing. There you go. I can't remember why Agrippa's given the speech off the top of my head. I don't think it's important. So equality before the law is an auspicious concept and works very justly in practice, i.e. everyone should be equal. It is not just that they should share equally in all respects as well. Is it not best that they should receive no distinction save on account of merit? So those who do rise above should have done it because they've earned it, not because they're just lucky. will not consent to be ruled forever by the same person. Yep, remember they'd killed Caesar, they'd killed the kings, all the rest of it. If it is forced to accept the conditions, it will hate the regime which has imposed them. Hence why I don't have too much power. Hence why Augustus doesn't have too much power, because if you did, you want to kill him. They are unwilling for others to impose upon them, because why would you? Because nobody wants a despotic ruler. They desire that no harm should befall any of its citizens if they're acting in the right way. It's a bit of a weird section of a speech. That is essentially it. It's basically Augustus justifying his power. Honestly, I don't have too much power. I don't rule above you. I'm equal to everybody. It's obviously not Augustus speaking directly, but the speech was written by Augustus. So please don't kill me, because I'm not acting like Caesar, am I? Am I not? So like I said at the beginning of the video, when we're talking about the extent to which Augustus restored the Republic, you're not just relying on those 3 sources. Okay, you can go back right through all of this about the constitutional settlements. You can use all of that stuff. There's also other sections of the source book you can use. Don't just think you have to rely on this section, because actually, although there's some brilliant quotes, there are also some fantastic bits of evidence in other places.